Before I tell you about the absolute destruction of my family's toxic empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments section. Thank you for being here. Grab a warm glass of water, sit down, and listen to me tell the whole story. The chill of the November air bit through my thin jacket, but the cold I felt radiating from my father was far worse. We were standing in the gravel parking lot behind Gallagher's Steakhouse. Inside, the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses continued, a celebration I had just walked out of. My father, Robert, a man whose massive frame was built by 40 years of hauling lumber and pouring concrete, loomed over me. His face, weathered and lined like an old leather boot, was flushed a deep crimson, partially from the expensive scotch, but mostly from his unwavering, blinding rage. "You've never been man enough to run this business, Julian," he snarled. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a vicious, biting edge that felt like a physical blow. He jabbed his thick, calloused index finger hard against my sternum. "You're too soft. You worry too much. You spend your life staring at computer screens and spreadsheets, hiding from the real work. Your brother, Carter, he's got the guts. He commands respect. He's a real man. People follow him because he's got the spine for this industry." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, the gravel crunching softly under my shoes, my jaw locked so tight my teeth ached. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to defend myself, to list the thousands of hours I had sacrificed, to lay out the undeniable financial realities of his company that I had single-handedly salvaged. But looking into his hard, unforgiving eyes, I realized the absolute futility of it all. To Robert Morrison, a man's worth was measured entirely by the dirt under his fingernails and the volume of his voice. Intellect, strategy, and dedication meant absolutely nothing if you didn't fit his archaic macho mold. He didn't wait for a response. He simply scoffed, a wet, dismissive sound, and turned his back on me. I watched him walk away, his heavy boots echoing across the asphalt as he headed back toward the warm glow of the restaurant to rejoin his golden boy. He left me standing alone in the dark after 15 years of breaking my back for his company. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly fathom in his arrogant, unshakable certainty, was that his harsh dismissal was the exact spark I needed. I didn't yell after him. I didn't let a single tear fall. I just watched the heavy wooden door of the steakhouse swing shut behind him, knowing with absolute, terrifying clarity that I was going to tear his beloved empire down to the studs. I was going to dismantle it piece by piece, brick by brick, and build my own fortress on the ashes of his misplaced pride. To understand why walking away and plotting the absolute destruction of my own father's legacy felt not just necessary, but deeply satisfying, you have to understand the foundation of the house I grew up in. It wasn't just about the money, and it certainly wasn't about the title of president. It was about a lifetime of systematic suffocation. It was about pouring every ounce of your soul into a vessel that had a hole in the bottom, simply because you didn't look like the favored son. My father started Morrison & Sons back in the late 80s. The mythology of the company was hammered into my brain from the time I could walk. He started with a rusty, beat-up Ford pickup truck, a stolen toolbox, and a relentless work ethic. By the time I was born, it was a highly respectable, mid-sized commercial and residential construction firm operating across 3 counties. Construction wasn't just my dad's profession. It was his religion. Every dinner conversation was dominated by the logistics of concrete pours, framing delays, weather contingencies, and long, profane rants about which supplier was trying to screw him over on the price of 2x4s. The company logo, a stylized hammer overlapping a steel beam, was plastered on everything we owned. And from my earliest memories, the narrative was carved in stone. The & Sons part of the company name was our undeniable destiny. But my dad made his choices about our roles very early on. Carter, my younger brother by 5 years, was the golden boy. He had a loud, booming laugh, a natural, effortless athleticism, and an uncanny ability to sweet-talk his way out of any trouble. If he broke a window, he charmed his way out of a grounding. If he failed a test, he convinced my parents the teacher had a vendetta. My dad looked at Carter and saw a mirror image of his idealized self. He saw the charismatic leader, the guy who could walk onto a muddy job site and command a crew of 50 roughneck tradesmen with a grin and a joke. I was the quiet one, the observer, the one who liked to understand how things worked on paper before I picked up a tool. While Carter was out in the yard throwing a football, completely ignoring his homework, I was sitting at the kitchen table, running my fingers over my dad's discarded, coffee-stained blueprints. I wanted to understand load-bearing walls, electrical schematics, and plumbing routes. You would think a business owner would fall to his knees and thank God for a son who actually wanted to understand the operational and financial side of the company. But not Robert. He saw my interest in the meticulous details as a fatal flaw. "Julian, you're always overthinking it," he would say, snatching a modified floor plan I had spent 3 hours drawing right out of my hands. He would look at it with disdain, as if I had handed him a piece of garbage. "Real construction workers don't need all this fancy math. We build things with our hands, son. We get dirty. You need to be out in the mud with the guys, carrying lumber, not sitting here acting like some soft architect." Meanwhile, Carter would come bursting through the back door, covered head to toe in mud from riding dirt bikes in the woods behind our subdivision, and my dad's face would light up like a stadium floodlight. "Look at him," my dad would beam, clapping a massive, heavy hand on Carter's shoulder, completely ignoring the mud tracking onto the kitchen floor. "That's a Morrison man right there, born for the site. He's got the dirt in his blood." It didn't matter that Carter barely scraped by in high school, cheating his way through basic algebra. It didn't matter that when he went to the local community college, he dropped out of his basic business management program after exactly 3 weeks because he claimed the professors were too strict and didn't know how the real world worked. My dad didn't discipline him. He actually celebrated the dropout. He bought Carter a brand new, lifted F-250 truck the very week he quit school, proudly telling all his foremen that the real world was the only classroom a man needed. I, on the other hand, had to work 2 separate part-time jobs just to pay my own way through a university finance and project management degree. I meticulously planned every minute of my schedule, depriving myself of sleep, just to ensure I could still work on my dad's job sites every weekend and all summer long. I wanted to learn the business from the dirt to the boardroom. I wanted to bring Morrison and Sons out of the dark ages and into the modern era. I just didn't realize that my father vastly preferred the dark ages, as long as he was the undisputed king of the shadows. When I officially joined the company full-time after graduating with honors, I didn't expect a parade, but I expected a chance. I hit the ground running. I didn't ask for a corner office with a window, and I certainly didn't ask for a fancy executive title. I took a cramped, drafty desk in the back of the equipment shed, right next to the diesel generators, and I started untangling the chaotic, terrifying mess of my father's bookkeeping. It was 2012. Most of the world was heavily digitized, but Robert Morrison was proudly still doing payroll on yellow legal pads. He tracked inventory by simply walking through the dusty warehouse, eyeballing the stacks of drywall, and guessing if we had enough. We were losing thousands of dollars a month to sheer inefficiency, lost invoices, and miscalculated tax liabilities. I remember the specific Tuesday I finally pitched a comprehensive, modern construction management software to him. I had spent 3 grueling weeks setting up a fully functional demo on my own time. I painstakingly inputted data from our last 5 major projects to show him exactly, down to the penny, how much money we were bleeding through inaccurate estimates and wasted, untracked materials. I carefully set my laptop on his scarred, heavy oak desk, moving a pile of crumpled receipts out of the way. "Dad, look at this," I said, pointing to the brightly colored graphs on the screen. "If we implement this system, we can track real-time costs across every active site. We can stop guessing on bids and crossing our fingers. It automatically updates inventory the second a foreman signs for a delivery. It'll save us at least 15% on overhead in the first year alone. It pays for itself in a month." He barely even glanced at the screen. He leaned back in his squeaky leather chair, crossing his thick arms over his plaid flannel shirt. "Julian," I didn't build a multi-million-dollar company by staring at a glowing screen, he grumbled, his voice dripping with condescension. I built it by looking a man in the eye, shaking his hand, and knowing my trade. Software doesn't pour concrete. A computer program doesn't negotiate with a stubborn, hungover plumber on a Tuesday morning. This, he said, aggressively tapping his temple with 2 fingers, is all the software I will ever need. But Dad, the entire industry is changing rapidly, I pleaded, feeling that familiar, suffocating knot of frustration tightening in my stomach. The big commercial contracts, the hospitals, the schools, they require detailed digital reporting. We can't even qualify to bid on them if we're still submitting carbon copy invoices and hand-drawn schedules. Carter strolled into the office right at that exact moment. He was an hour and a half late for his shift, holding a large iced coffee, his sunglasses pushed up on his perfectly styled hair. "What's the nerd talking about now, Pops?" he asked, smirking as he looked at my laptop like it was a piece of alien technology. "Julian wants to run the construction company with a video game," my dad chuckled. I watched the tension completely leave my father's shoulders the second he looked at his favorite son. Carter laughed, a loud, booming, obnoxious sound that always seemed to take up all the oxygen in the room. "Yeah, right. Hey, Dad, I need to take off early today. I got a tea time with some of the guys from the framing crew down at the municipal course. Building team morale, you know how it is." "Good man," my dad said brightly, instantly tossing Carter a set of keys to the newest company truck. "Keep the boys happy out there. That's how you lead." I snapped my laptop shut so hard the hinges cracked. My jaw ached. I was working 60-hour weeks, catching massive billing errors, ensuring our insurance premiums were paid so we didn't get shut down, while Carter was playing golf on company time and getting praised as a visionary leader. The resentment wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, agonizing burn, building up year after painful year. I watched Carter constantly screw up on site. He would misread simple architectural plans, order the wrong grade of materials, or completely alienate crucial subcontractors with his arrogant, frat boy attitude. And every single time, without fail, I was the one sent in to clean up the wreckage. I was the one who had to soothe the furious clients, negotiate desperate returns with the suppliers, and beg the subcontractors to come back to work. And every single time, my dad would brush it off as a valuable learning curve for Carter. But the real wake-up call, the defining moment the blinders were ripped from my eyes, happened purely by accident. I had gone back to my parents' house on a quiet Sunday afternoon to drop off some updated, highly sensitive insurance liability paperwork. The house was dead quiet. I walked softly down the hallway toward my dad's home office, noticing the heavy wooden door was slightly ajar. I was about to knock when I heard my mother's voice. "Robert, you have to be extremely careful how you structure the inheritance," she was saying. Her tone wasn't casual. It was hushed, urgent, and deeply calculating. "If you give them equal shares of the company, Julian will just try to take over everything. He's too rigid. He doesn't understand family dynamics. He'll push Carter out." I stopped dead in my tracks. My hand hovered paralyzed over the brass doorknob. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. "I know, Martha, I know," my dad replied, his voice heavy with agreement. "That's exactly why the lawyer is setting up the trust this way. Carter gets the controlling voting shares of the corporation. The real estate, the heavy equipment, the brand, it all goes to him. Julian gets a minority, non-voting stake. He's a good worker, Martha, but he's not a leader. He's just a support guy. Carter is the face of this family. If things get tough, Carter will make sure his brother gets a salary." "Exactly," my mother agreed smoothly, without a single ounce of hesitation. "Carter has a big heart. Julian is just, well, he's always been a bit cold, a bit too calculated. He'll manage the books in the back, and Carter will run the show out front. It's for the best." I backed away from the door, my steps totally silent. The insurance papers trembled violently in my hands. I felt physically sick. The betrayal tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. It wasn't just my dad. It was my mother, too. The woman who was supposed to love us equally had already written the end of my story. They saw my relentless dedication, my sleepless nights, my meticulous care for the business as nothing more than a convenient tool to ensure their golden boy had a smooth, effortless ride to the top. I wasn't a partner. I wasn't an heir. I was the hired help they didn't even have to pay market value for. I didn't storm in and confront them. I was too stunned, too deeply wounded. I drove back to my cramped apartment and sat in the dark living room for hours, staring at the wall. I realized then that my blood, sweat, and tears were watering a massive tree that I would never, ever be allowed to eat the fruit from. But God help me, I still tried to prove my worth. I thought hard work could beat delusion. A year later, I single-handedly sourced, pitched, landed, and managed the biggest commercial contract in the history of Morrison & Sons. A $2.3 million corporate office complex renovation. I worked myself to the absolute bone. I was on the dirt site at 5 a.m. every single day, checking every lumber delivery, managing every chaotic subcontractor schedule. Carter didn't show his face on the site once. We brought the massive project in 2 full weeks ahead of schedule and 8% under budget. It was an unprecedented win. The corporate client was thrilled. I thought, finally, this is it. This is the undeniable mathematical proof of my value. I walked confidently into my dad's office the day the final massive check cleared the bank. "Dad, we need to talk about the future," I said, my voice steady and professional. "This project proves we can handle large-scale, complex commercial work. I have a whole 5-year expansion plan mapped out. I think it's time we officially talk about my role moving forward. A full partnership." He looked up from his newspaper, slowly adjusting his reading glasses. He didn't look proud. He didn't look happy. He looked profoundly annoyed. "You did a good job on the paperwork, Julian. The client is happy," he said dismissively. "But don't get ahead of yourself. Managing a spreadsheet and playing on a computer is one thing. Leading men in the dirt is another. You're a great support guy, but you don't have the grit to be the boss." I stared at him, the memory of that overheard conversation about the inheritance ringing loudly in my ears. Support guy? Dad? I ran that entire $2.3 million project from the ground up. And Carter kept the crews motivated. My dad countered, a blatant, disgusting lie. "Look, we're not changing the hierarchy of this family. Know your place, son." That brings us to the agonizing climax of my humiliation. My father's 60th birthday party. My parents had rented out the luxurious back banquet room of Gallagher's Steakhouse. There were about 50 people there, extended family, close friends, our biggest material suppliers, and our most lucrative clients. There was a premium open bar, thick cuts of prime rib, the works. I was sitting at a small table near the back near the kitchen doors, nursing a club soda, watching Carter hold court near the bar. He was laughing loudly, slapping important clients on the back, taking credit for a year of success he had absolutely nothing to do with. Halfway through the dinner, my dad confidently tapped his heavy silver fork against his crystal wine glass. The bustling room immediately fell silent. He stood up, his chest puffed out, his face flushed with expensive wine and immense pride. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice projecting easily across the silent room. "Reaching 60 makes a man think hard about his legacy, about the mark he's leaving behind on this earth." My stomach instantly dropped into a bottomless pit. I knew exactly what was coming. I gripped the edge of the white tablecloth so hard my knuckles turned pure white. "Morrison & Sons has been my entire life's work," he continued, placing a dramatic hand over his heart. "But a smart man knows when it's time to pass the heavy torch. I want this company to move into the bright future strong, led by someone who understands what it truly means to be a Morrison. Someone with natural, undeniable authority." He looked directly across the room at Carter. Carter was already smiling, puffing out his chest, looking like he had just won the lottery. "Effective at the end of this month, I am stepping down as president. and I am incredibly proud to announce that my son, Carter Morrison, will be taking over as the sole president of Morrison & Sons. The room erupted in thunderous applause. My mother was weeping, dabbing her eyes with a linen napkin. Subcontractors were cheering loudly. Carter swaggered up to the front, hugging my dad tightly before taking the microphone. "Thank you, Dad," Carter said smoothly, flashing his bright, rehearsed smile. "I promise to honor your incredible legacy. We're going to take this company to the next level. We're going to dominate this entire state." More cheers, more frantic clapping. I just sat there, frozen in time. I felt entirely numb, like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. I looked around the room at the people applauding. People whose paychecks I had personally calculated to save their homes, whose on-site crises I had solved at 3 a.m., whose contracts I had fiercely negotiated. And they were cheering wildly for a man who literally could not tell you the difference between gross margin and markup if his actual life depended on it. I didn't stay for the cake. I walked out the back door, into the cold night air of the parking lot, where my father followed me to deliver his final, fatal verdict about my manhood. I didn't sleep a single second that night. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring blankly at the glowing screen of my laptop. For years, I had been building the digital infrastructure of Morrison & Sons from scratch. Because my father refused to learn the systems, I held the master keys to the kingdom. I knew every password, every client contact email, every profit margin, every supplier discount code, and every single glaring weakness in their chaotic supply chain. I opened a brand new folder on my desktop. I named it Pinnacle. The next morning, I walked into the main office at 6:30 a.m. The place was dead empty, smelling of stale coffee and sawdust. I packed a single cardboard box with my personal items. A framed finance degree, a few high-quality pens, my favorite coffee mug. Nothing else. When my dad finally strolled in at 8:45 a.m., looking exhausted and slightly hungover from his grand celebration, I was standing patiently by the front door. I handed him a crisp white envelope. "I'm done," I said. My voice didn't shake. I felt remarkably, dangerously calm. He looked down at the envelope, then back up at me, a condescending, ugly smirk spreading across his face. "Quitting? Really, Julian? Just because your little feelings are hurt about last night? Where exactly are you gonna go? You've never worked anywhere else. You don't know how to survive out in the real world without my name on your weekly paycheck." "I'll manage," I said softly, my eyes locked onto his. "Fine," he scoffed loudly, carelessly tossing the unopened envelope onto his cluttered desk. "Go pout for a few weeks. When you run out of money and realize how hard it is, don't expect me to give you your old salary back. You'll start at the bottom with the day laborers." "I'm not coming back, Robert." I used his first name for the very first time in my 34 years of life. The absolute shock that registered on his face was the last thing I saw before I turned my back and walked out the door. He honestly thought I was walking away empty-handed, a defeated coward. But I was walking away with the complete, detailed blueprint of his total destruction. Starting a commercial construction firm from absolute scratch isn't just hard. It's a brutal, terrifying, bone-crushing grind. I took every single dime of my life savings, cashed out my modest retirement fund, and leased a tiny, depressing, windowless office in an old industrial park on the edge of town. I bought a used, high-mileage work truck, 2 cheap folding tables, and the most advanced, expensive construction management software license on the market. I officially incorporated as Pinnacle Construction Solutions. No & Sons. No legacy. Just a promise of meticulous quality. I didn't go after Morrison & Sons' massive clients right away. I was highly strategic. I started small, taking on the complex residential renovations and minor commercial repair jobs that my dad and Carter always considered beneath their grand vision. My very first real test was a $40,000 kitchen and structural remodel for an older couple. The county building inspector assigned to my project was a guy named Wyatt. Wyatt was notoriously difficult, an absolute stickler for the codes who loved to throw his bureaucratic weight around and shut down entire sites for minor technical infractions. My dad used to literally scream at Wyatt over the phone, claiming the inspector had a personal, malicious vendetta against our family. When Wyatt pulled his county vehicle up to my site, his metal clipboard already out, his face was set in a deep, permanent scowl. "Morrison, right?" he grunted, looking suspiciously at my unmarked truck. "Don't think changing the name on the door means I'm going to overlook the sloppy, corner-cutting framing your family is famous for." I didn't get defensive. I didn't yell or puff out my chest like my father would. I simply smiled and pulled out my high-end tablet. "Mr. Wyatt, I assure you, Pinnacle operates entirely differently. Here are the digital schematics, the exact load calculations signed off by a licensed structural engineer, and a time-stamped, high-resolution photo log of every single framing joint before we closed the drywall." I calmly handed him the tablet. Wyatt stared at the glowing screen, swiping through the impeccably organized, undeniable files. The scowl slowly faded from his weathered face, replaced by a look of genuine, profound surprise. "You have all this documented, digitally, before I even asked?" "Total transparency is our core policy," I replied smoothly. He handed the tablet back, a very slight, reluctant nod of respect in his eyes. "Well, if the physical work matches this paperwork, we won't have any problems today, Julian. We finished the job 3 days early and exactly on budget. The clients were so ecstatic they immediately recommended me to their daughter, who was opening a boutique downtown. That led to a $150,000 retail build-out. Word started to spread rapidly through the local network. Julian Morrison wasn't just Robert's quiet, nerdy son. He was the guy who actually answered his phone on the first ring, provided hyper-accurate estimates, and delivered flawless work without the dramatic, aggressive shouting matches. Meanwhile, news from my old company was starting to leak out into the community, and it was catastrophic. It started with a heavy knock on my office door about 6 months after I left. I opened it to find Nathan standing there in the rain. Nathan was a master carpenter, a guy in his late 50s with forearms like tree trunks and a heart of gold. He had been my dad's most trusted, loyal foreman for 20 solid years. He looked exhausted, the deep lines around his eyes much more pronounced than I remembered. "Julian," he said, slowly taking off his soaked work cap. "You got a minute?" I brought him inside, handed him a towel, and poured him a hot coffee. "What's going on, Nate? Everything okay over at Morrison?" He let out a harsh, bitter, echoing laugh. "Morrison is a sinking ship, kid. Carter is running it straight into the damn ground at 100 miles an hour." I leaned forward, resting my arms heavily on the desk. "Tell me, the kid actually thinks he's a Wall Street CEO, not a local contractor." Nathan spat, his voice thick with raw disgust. "He shows up to the dirt sites at 10 a.m. wearing a designer suit, yells at the crews for not working fast enough, and then leaves for 3-hour networking lunches where he just drinks. But that's not even the worst part. He changed our main suppliers. He dropped Henderson Lumber, who we've used and trusted for a decade, for some cheap, shady outfit from 3 counties over because they offered him a personal under-the-table kickback. He's using substandard materials on load-bearing walls?" I asked, my blood running ice cold. That was professional suicide and a massive liability in this industry. "Worse?" Nathan said, leaning in closer, his voice dropping. "Last week, I handed out the weekly checks. 2 of my best, most loyal guys had their salaries severely docked. When I angrily confronted Carter, he looked me in the eye and said they were being penalized for inefficiency. Julian, those guys worked 10 hours of unpaid overtime to fix a massive foundation error Carter himself made because he misread the damn survey. He's literally stealing from the men's pockets to cover his own colossal losses. I can't look my crew in the eye anymore. I threw my keys on his desk and quit this morning." He looked at me, a silent, desperate plea in his tired eyes. "I hear you're doing things the right way over here. You got room for an old dog who just wants to build good houses." I hired him on the absolute spot, offering him a salary 10% higher than what my dad was paying him with full comprehensive health benefits. Nathan wasn't just a great worker. He was a walking, talking billboard for my integrity. Within a single month, 3 more of Morrison's absolute best, most experienced tradesmen jumped ship to come work for Pinnacle. They all had the exact same horror story: Carter's staggering arrogance, bounced expense checks, and a toxic, chaotic environment where blame was shifted daily. Carter wasn't blind. He knew I was rapidly gaining traction, stealing his best men, and his fragile ego couldn't handle it. He decided to play dirty. I was meticulously preparing a bid for a $400,000 renovation of a regional medical clinic. It was a highly complex job, requiring strict adherence to state health department codes. I was using a specialized electrical subcontractor named Aaron. Aaron had done some decent work for Morrison and Sons in the past, but he reached out to me out of the blue, claiming he wanted to work with the Smart brother. I sent Aaron the digital blueprints and my highly confidential, preliminary estimating software file so he could input his exact electrical costs. But I wasn't stupid. The software file had a built-in digital tracking code, a little cybersecurity trick I learned in college to protect proprietary data. 2 days later, my system flagged a massive red alert. The exact file I sent Aaron had been opened, copied, and directly forwarded to an IP address registered to the main office of Morrison and Sons. Carter was actively trying to steal my entire bid structure, my profit margins, and my specialized vendor pricing so he could undercut me by a few dollars. I didn't call a lawyer immediately. I didn't angrily confront Aaron. I just smiled, a cold, ruthless smile. If Carter wanted to play corporate espionage games, I was going to teach him a brutal masterclass. I created a secondary, completely fake file. I intentionally altered the structural requirements, purposely using outdated medical codes and drastically underestimating the cost of the specialized HVAC systems by about 40%. I made it look like a highly aggressive, incredibly cheap, but totally flawed bid. I named the file final_clinic_revision and sent it back to Aaron, with a casual, friendly note saying I had found a brilliant way to drastically cut costs. I knew Aaron would pass it straight to Carter within the hour. When official bid day came, I submitted my real, meticulously calculated, slightly higher proposal. It wasn't the absolute cheapest, but it was structurally and legally bulletproof. A week later, the clinic board announced the winner: Pinnacle Construction Solutions. I found out later from a reliable contact on the medical board exactly what had happened behind closed doors. Carter had confidently submitted a bid exactly $5,000 cheaper than the fake file I had leaked. But because he didn't actually understand the math or the complex medical codes he was blindly copying, his proposal was fundamentally flawed. He had proposed using cheap, residential-grade ventilation in surgical sterilization rooms, a massive health code violation. The board didn't just reject his bid with laughter. They officially blacklisted Morrison and Sons from ever bidding on their medical facilities again due to gross, dangerous incompetence. The storm was picking up hurricane-force winds, and my family was starting to feel the freezing rain. That night, my cell phone rang. The caller ID flashed Mom. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time, watching it vibrate across my desk, before finally answering. Julian. Her voice was wavering, thick with a forced, trembling emotion. Julian, honey, we desperately need to talk. I'm extremely busy, Mom. What is it? I asked coldly. It's your brother, she said, launching immediately into the emotional guilt trip I knew so well. He's having a really hard time. The market is so tough right now. Your father is so stressed his blood pressure is dangerously high. I heard you took that medical clinic job. Julian, Carter really needed that contract to make payroll. He told me you somehow tricked the board. Your family, Julian. You're supposed to look out for each other. You need to call the board tomorrow and withdraw your bid. Tell them you're overextended and personally recommend Carter. I gripped the phone, a cold, hard, unyielding anger settling over my chest. You want me to commit business suicide and ruin my reputation to cover up Carter's absolute incompetence? Don't use that disrespectful tone with me, she snapped. the sweet motherly facade dropping instantly to reveal the manipulator underneath. You are being incredibly selfish. You always have been. You're trying to destroy your father's legacy just because you're deeply jealous of your brother. No, Mom, I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of any warmth. I'm not destroying anything. Carter is doing that all by himself. I'm just building my own legacy. Tell Robert and Carter they better learn how to use a calculator, because I'm not holding back anymore. I hung up the phone and permanently blocked her number. There was no going back now. The invisible, toxic chains of family obligation were completely shattered. It was time to go straight for the jugular. 18 months into running Pinnacle, the landscape had completely shifted. I had a dedicated team of 12 full-time, highly paid employees and a solid roster of the most reliable subcontractors in the state. We were hitting over $3 million in revenue, and our profit margins were consistently sitting pretty above 18%. But I was still technically swimming in the minor leagues. I was a respected up-and-comer, but I needed a whale to cement my dominance. The golden opportunity arrived in the form of a massive, unprecedented $2.8 million renovation project for the brand new downtown headquarters of a regional tech firm called Apex Innovations. This was the exact type of high-profile, prestige project my father had spent his entire 40-year career desperately trying to land and failing miserably. It required a deep, complex understanding of modern infrastructure, smart building technology integration, and a flawless, heavily documented safety record. It was completely, undeniably out of Morrison & Sons' league, but I knew, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that Carter would try to bid on it out of sheer, blinding desperation. Their residential work had dried up due to terrible online reviews, and they were bleeding cash from every pore. I locked myself in my office for 3 solid weeks. I didn't see sunlight. I didn't sleep more than 4 hours a night. I pored over every single minuscule detail of the Apex architectural plans until my eyes burned. I didn't just provide a standard cost estimate on a spreadsheet. I built a comprehensive, fully interactive 3D digital model of the entire construction process. I highlighted potential logistical bottlenecks with the city traffic and offered proactive, cost-saving solutions. I secured ironclad letters of intent from the top-tier specialized tech subcontractors in the state. My proposal wasn't just a bid. It was a legally binding promise of absolute perfection. The day of the final, in-person presentations, I walked into the sleek, glass-walled, high-rise boardroom of Apex Innovations. Sitting at the head of the long, polished mahogany table was Charles, the CEO. Charles was a sharp, fiercely intimidating man in his late 60s, known throughout the business community for his ruthless efficiency and his absolute zero tolerance for incompetence or excuses. I calmly set up my presentation, handed out thick, leather-bound copies of my proposal, and walked his entire executive board through my digital model. I showed them exactly how we would route the complex server cooling systems without compromising the structural integrity of the historic downtown building. I showed them our proprietary real-time tracking app, where they could see daily budget updates, labor hours, and high-resolution photo logs directly from their smartphones. When I finally finished speaking and turned off the projector, the massive room was dead silent. Charles slowly flipped through the final pages of my heavy binder, his expression completely unreadable. Finally, he closed the binder with a loud thud and looked up, his piercing gray eyes locking directly onto mine. "Julian Morrison," Charles said slowly, leaning back in his expensive ergonomic chair. "You're Robert Morrison's boy, aren't you?" I didn't flinch. I held his gaze. "I am. But Pinnacle is my company. We are a completely separate entity." Charles let out a dry, raspy, humorless chuckle. "I know it is. Your father and your highly colorful brother pitched to us yesterday afternoon." I kept my face perfectly neutral, masking the surge of adrenaline. "Is that so?" "Yes," Charles said, reaching into his briefcase and tossing an incredibly thin, crumpled manila folder carelessly onto the center of the mahogany table. That was their official proposal. A single-page spreadsheet with a bottom-line number that was suspiciously low, and a verbal handshake promise from your brother that he'd take care of us. No logistics plan. No risk assessment. When my board asked about the complex HVAC integration for the server rooms, your brother actually tried to charm our female VP of operations and told her not to worry her pretty head about the technical stuff. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to suppress a grimace. Carter's arrogant, outdated sexism was going to be his final, glorious undoing. Charles leaned forward, steepling his fingers, his eyes narrowing. But here is the truly interesting part of this story, Julian. 10 years ago, when Apex was just a small, struggling startup, we hired your father to remodel our very first tiny warehouse. Halfway through the job, I realized his tracking was an absolute mess. We were losing money. I brought down a laptop to the muddy site and tried to show him a simple Excel macro to track material waste and save us both money. Do you know what he did? My heart skipped a beat. I knew exactly what Robert Morrison would do. He insulted you. He told me, Charles said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper, that men in expensive suits who play with keyboards have absolutely no business telling a real man how to pour concrete. He called me a pencil-pushing idiot in front of my own staff. Charles reached out and tapped his hand firmly on my thick, meticulously crafted proposal binder. I have waited a full decade to see Morrison and Sons humbled. Your brother's pathetic, insulting presentation yesterday almost did the trick. But this... He looked down at my binder with genuine admiration. This is absolute poetry. You actually beat their desperate price by $200,000 because your logistics are flawless, but more importantly, you proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the keyboard actually controls the concrete. He stood up and extended his hand across the wide table. You have the job, Julian. I expect flawless execution. I reached out and shook his hand, my grip firm and unyielding. You'll get nothing less, Charles. Walking out of that massive glass building, holding the officially signed letter of intent for a $2.8 million contract, the sunlight hit my face differently. The heavy air of the city tasted cleaner, sweeter. I pulled out my phone and immediately dialed Nathan. Nate, I said the second he answered over the screaming sound of a circular saw in the background. Tell the boys to pack up the residential gear. We're going downtown. We just landed Apex. Nathan let out a massive whoop of joy that practically shattered my eardrum. I knew it, boss. I absolutely knew it. We are the kings of this town now. Hey, by the way, I got a frantic call from Elijah over at Henderson Lumber this morning. Elijah was the major supplier my dad had used for years, the one Carter had arrogantly dumped for a cheap kickback months ago. He was a slippery guy, always playing both sides to see who was winning. What did Elijah want? He was practically begging on his knees to open a massive commercial account for us. Nathan chuckled darkly. Said Morrison and Sons hasn't paid a single material invoice in 90 days. They are on a strict, cash-only freeze across the entire county. No one will give them a single nail on credit. Elijah said Carter tried to write a check yesterday for some drywall, and it bounced so hard it almost broke the teller's window at the bank. I leaned against the side of my truck, a cold, calculating, deeply satisfied smile spreading across my face. The walls weren't just closing in on my father's empire. They were actively collapsing, crushing everything inside. The financial rot Carter had introduced was entirely terminal. The Apex contract wasn't just a massive financial win for my business. It was the final rusty nail in the coffin for theirs. The news of Pinnacle taking the biggest corporate job of the decade spread through the local construction industry like a massive wildfire. General contractors who used to throw scraps to Morrison and Sons started aggressively calling my office directly, begging for meetings. Subcontractors who were owed thousands of dollars by Carter started refusing to show up to his sites, leaving his half-finished residential frames rotting in the rain. I knew the massive explosion was coming. I knew Robert wouldn't just sit quietly in the smoking ashes of his legacy. He would look for someone to blame, someone to project his monumental failure onto, and he would come looking for me. I was ready. I had the facts, I had the ultimate power, and most importantly, I finally had the undeniable proof that I was the only real, capable businessman that family had ever produced. The fallout from the Apex Innovations contract was swift and brutal. I didn't just stop at taking the biggest project in the county. I systematically went after every single core client my father and Carter had relied on for the past decade. I didn't do it through underhanded tactics or aggressive pricing. I simply walked into their offices, presented my comprehensive digital maintenance solutions, guaranteed my completion dates with heavy penalty clauses, and showed them the unparalleled transparency of Pinnacle Construction Solutions. Within 3 weeks, Thompson Industries canceled their 8-year relationship with Morrison & Sons. Riverside Manufacturing walked away 2 days later. Central Medical Group followed suit by the end of the month. Every single bread-and-butter client that kept my father's lights on had officially signed exclusive contracts with me. I was starving them out, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the pressure cooked them alive. The explosion happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my corner office. It was a real office now, 3,000 square feet of prime commercial real estate with sleek glass walls, a massive conference room, and a team of 20 highly paid professionals working outside my door. My desk phone buzzed. It was my receptionist, Sarah, and her voice was tight with panic. "Julian, your father is here. He's with a woman, I assume your mother. I tried to tell them you were in a meeting, but he's refusing to listen. He's demanding." The heavy glass door to my office violently swung open before she could finish her sentence. Robert Morrison stormed into my office, looking like a cornered, wounded animal. His clothes were rumpled. His face was a dangerous shade of purple, and his massive hands were curled into tight fists at his sides. My mother, Martha, trailed closely behind him, clutching her designer purse to her chest like a shield, her eyes darting nervously around my pristine, high-end office. "You son of a bitch," Robert growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. He marched right up to my heavy mahogany desk, leaning his knuckles on the polished wood. "You absolute traitor." I didn't stand up. I didn't flinch. I calmly clicked save on the spreadsheet I was working on and closed my laptop. "Hello, Robert. Mom. Have a seat." "I am not sitting down in this stolen office," he roared, slamming his fist against the desk. The coffee in my mug violently spilled over the rim. "Thompson Industries, Riverside, Central Medical. You have been systematically stealing my clients. You are actively trying to destroy the business I spent 40 years building. You are taking food off your own brother's table." Martha stepped forward, tears already streaming down her face, playing her usual role of the emotional manipulator. "Julian, how could you do this to your own family? Your father is on the verge of a heart attack. Carter is absolutely beside himself. We are facing financial ruin, and you are sitting here in this fancy office gloating. Have you lost your mind?" I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing. The guilt trips that used to paralyze me felt completely hollow now. "I haven't stolen a single client, Robert," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat and level. "I offered them better service, full transparency, and a modern approach to construction management. They chose Pinnacle because Morrison & Sons is failing to deliver. Last I checked, that is called the free market." "The free market?" Robert spat, his eyes bulging. "This is sabotage. You couldn't handle the fact that Carter was the better man for the job, so you threw a temper tantrum and started playing dirty tricks to ruin his reputation." I stood up slowly. I walked around the edge of my desk and leaned against it, crossing my arms. I looked my father dead in the eye. He looked older. The stress had carved deep ravines into his face. "Carter isn't the better man for the job," I said quietly. "Carter is a fraud. And the only reason your company is failing is because you handed the keys to a teenager in a man's body who doesn't know the first thing about running a business." "Don't you dare talk about your brother that way," Martha shrieked, stepping between us. "Carter has been working day and night to keep that company afloat. He is doing his best in a terrible economy." "His best?" I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Do you want to see his best?" I walked over to the wall panel and pressed a button. The automatic blinds were down, plunging the office into a dim, heavy shadow. I picked up a small remote and lowered the massive projector screen from the ceiling. I opened a highly secured folder on my desktop and projected it onto the wall for both of them to see. "What is this?" Robert demanded, squinting at the glowing spreadsheets filling the screen. "More of your useless computer games?" "This," I said, my voice cutting through the dark room like a scalpel, "is the complete, unedited financial reality of Morrison and Sons. David, your head accountant, came to me 3 days ago looking for a job. He couldn't sleep at night anymore knowing what was happening. He handed over everything." Robert's face went completely slack. The anger instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden, terrifying confusion. I pointed a laser pointer at the top row of the spreadsheet. "Let's look at the numbers, Robert. Since you handed Carter the presidency 2 years ago, your gross revenue is down 35%. But that's not the bad part. Look at your operating cash flow. It's non-existent. Carter hasn't just been losing bids. He has been actively, maliciously bleeding your company dry." I clicked to the next slide. It showed a series of massive wire transfers. "Carter hasn't been paying your material suppliers. He hasn't been paying the subcontractors. Do you know where that money went?" I asked, looking directly at my mother. She was gripping the back of a leather chair, her knuckles bone white. "He used the company's operating funds to buy himself a brand new Porsche 911. He used the company account to fund weekend gambling trips to Las Vegas with his buddies. He disguised them as client networking events, but David kept the real receipts." "No," Martha gasped, shaking her head frantically. "No, that's a lie. Carter wouldn't do that. You fabricated these documents to frame him." "I wish I did, Mom," I said coldly. I clicked to the final, most devastating slide. It was a scanned copy of a legal bank document. "This is the killing blow. 6 months ago, when the suppliers officially cut him off and he couldn't make the weekly salary for the cruise, Carter went to a predatory commercial lender. He took out a massive, high-interest bridge loan to cover his tracks." Robert stepped closer to the screen, his breath hitching in his throat. He reached out a trembling hand, tracing the signature on the projected document. He forged my signature?" "No," I said softly. "He didn't need to. You gave him full power of attorney and controlling voting shares when you made him president. He legally bound the company to this debt. But the company assets weren't enough collateral for the loan amount he needed." I let the silence hang in the air for a terrible, agonizing second. "He collateralized your house, Robert?" I revealed, the words dropping like anvils. "He secretly mortgaged the family home. He completely drained the retirement accounts you spent 40 years building. Your entire college fund for the grandkids, the massive inheritance you were so worried about protecting from me, it's gone. Every single penny is gone. Morrison and Sons has been dead for 6 months. You are completely bankrupt, and the bank is going to foreclose on your house in less than 30 days. The silence in the office was absolute, deafening. I watched my father, the indestructible macho titan of industry, physically crumble. His shoulders caved inward. His knees buckled, and he collapsed heavily into one of the guest chairs. He buried his face in his massive, calloused hands, and for the first time in my entire life, I heard Robert Morrison cry. It wasn't a quiet weeping. It was a guttural, agonizing sob of a man realizing his entire life's work had been dismantled by his own blinding pride and favoritism. Martha fell to the floor next to him, burying her face in his shoulder, wailing Carter's name over and over again, completely shattered by the undeniable truth. I stood there in the dim light of the projector, looking down at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. I had the ultimate victory. I had absolute, undeniable vindication. I had proven that I was the smartest, most capable man in the room. But as I watched my parents weep on the floor of my luxury office, I didn't feel the massive rush of triumphant joy I had expected. I didn't feel like celebrating. I just felt an overwhelming, heavy emptiness. I had won the war, but looking at the absolute devastation left in the wake, I realized the victory tasted entirely like ash. The death of Morrison and Sons was a slow, highly public, and profoundly humiliating spectacle. Within 2 weeks of that meeting in my office, the massive commercial lenders called in Carter's predatory loans. When he couldn't produce the cash, the lawyers swooped in like vultures. The company officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. I stood across the street on a cold Tuesday morning and watched the massive heavy machinery auction. Men I didn't know were driving away the bulldozers, the excavators, and the white fleet trucks bearing my family's name, buying them for pennies on the dollar to satisfy the furious creditors. The massive warehouse where I spent my childhood summers sweeping sawdust was padlocked and plastered with bank foreclosure notices. Carter didn't even have the spine to face the music. The moment the first bankruptcy lawyer knocked on his door, he packed his expensive clothes into his illegally purchased sports car and fled the state. He changed his phone number and vanished, leaving our aging parents holding the massive, crushing bag of debt he had created. He proved exactly what kind of real man he truly was when the pressure actually hit. A few days after the final asset auction, the security buzzer at my private apartment complex rang. I looked at the video monitor and saw my mother standing in the rain. She looked 10 years older, her hair unkempt, the expensive designer clothes replaced by a simple, damp raincoat. I buzzed her up, leaving the front door unlocked. She walked into my living room, looking around at my clean, modern furniture with wide, exhausted eyes. She didn't try to manipulate me this time. There was no fake sweetness, no aggressive guilt trips. She was just a broken, terrified woman. "Julian," she whispered, her voice cracking. She wouldn't look me in the eye. The bank served us the final foreclosure papers this morning. We have exactly 14 days to vacate the house. We have absolutely nothing left. Your father's pension is gone. The savings are gone. We are going to be on the street. She finally looked up, tears brimming in her bloodshot eyes. "Please, I know we wronged you. I know we made terrible mistakes. But you are so successful now. Your company is making millions. Please, Julian, you have to pay the lawyers. You have to save the house. It's your childhood home." I stood by the kitchen island, looking at the woman who had happily plotted to cut me out of the family legacy to protect her golden boy. My chest felt tight, a battle raging between the lingering instinct of a son to protect his mother and the hard-won boundaries of a man who refused to be abused anymore. "I'm not paying Carter's debts, Mom," I said, my voice firm and uncompromising. "I am not bailing out the sinking ship he actively drilled holes into. That house was the collateral he chose to gamble with. It belongs to the bank now." She let out a sharp, devastated sob, covering her face with her hands. "Where are we supposed to go, Julian? We have nothing." I walked over to my desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick manila folder. I set it on the kitchen island and pushed it toward her. "I bought a small, 2-bedroom condo on the east side of town," I said evenly. "It's completely paid off in full. The deed is in a trust controlled by me, but you and Robert have the lifetime right to live there rent-free. I've also set up a small monthly stipend to cover your basic utilities and groceries." She slowly lowered her hands, staring at the folder like it was a mirage. You bought us a home?" "Yes," I said, crossing my arms. "But there are strict, non-negotiable conditions. Condition number 1. Carter is never allowed to set foot on that property. If I find out you are secretly funneling my money to him, or letting him sleep on the couch, the stipend ends immediately and the condo gets sold. Condition number 2. You never, ever try to manipulate me with guilt again. We are done playing family politics. I am providing you with shelter because I refuse to let my parents freeze on the street, not because I am looking to buy my way back into your good graces." She reached out with a trembling hand and touched the folder. She didn't argue. She didn't try to negotiate. The fight was completely gone from her. "Thank you, Julian," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We don't deserve this." "No," I agreed softly. You don't. But this is where the cycle breaks. 6 months passed. The brutal winter melted into a bright, productive spring. Pinnacle Construction Solutions was operating at maximum capacity. We successfully wrapped the Apex Innovations headquarters 2 weeks early, cementing my reputation as the premier commercial contractor in the entire state. My team was loyal, my margins were flawless, and the chaotic nightmare of Morrison & Sons felt like a distant, fading memory. I was sitting in my office early one Monday morning, reviewing a massive logistics report, when Nathan knocked quietly on the glass door. "Boss," Nathan said, stepping inside. He looked slightly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "There's a guy down at the front gate of the new medical facility site. He's asking for an application. Says he has 40 years of experience in structural framing." I didn't look up from my tablet. "If he's got the experience, hand him the paperwork, Nate. We always need good hands." "Julian," Nathan said softly. "It's your dad." I slowly lowered the tablet. The silence in the office stretched out, heavy and thick. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to the job site. When I pulled up, Robert was standing near the chain-link perimeter fence. He was wearing faded steel-toe boots, worn-out jeans, and a plain white t-shirt. He didn't look like a proud, arrogant business owner anymore. He just looked like an aging, tired man looking for an honest day's work. I parked the truck and walked over to him. He took off his baseball cap as I approached, his eyes fixed firmly on the dirt. "Robert," I said carefully. "Julian," he replied, his voice rough. He cleared his throat, struggling to find the words. I can't sit in that condo anymore. It's driving me crazy. I need to work. I need to sweat. I know how to frame. I know how to pour. I know you run a tight ship. I'm just asking for a chance to swing a hammer. Minimum wage. No special treatment." I looked at the man who had told me I wasn't man enough to run a business. He was stripping away every last ounce of his pride, begging his rejected son for a lifeline. I thought about turning him away. It would have been the ultimate crushing revenge. But looking at his calloused hands, I realized that true power isn't about destroying people when they are already down. It's about giving them the opportunity to rebuild themselves under your rules. "I don't need a guy to swing a hammer," I said flatly. Robert's shoulders slumped. "I need an experienced site supervisor who knows how to spot a bad framing joint from 50 feet away. I need someone who enforces safety protocols without exception. The salary is $80,000 a year. You report directly to Nathan. If you argue with his modern methods, or if you ever disrespect my crews, you are fired on the spot. Do you understand?" Robert looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. He nodded fiercely. "I understand, boss. I won't let you down." And surprisingly, he didn't. Robert thrived under the strict, organized structure of Pinnacle. Without the burden of running the finances he never understood, and without the toxic need to constantly cover for Carter's massive failures, he was actually a brilliant manager. He was tough, fair, and commanded genuine respect from the younger guys. A few months into Robert's employment, the final, pathetic ghost of my past decided to show up. I was doing a site walkthrough with Robert and Nathan when a beat-up, rusty sedan pulled through the open gates. Carter stepped out. He looked terrible. He had gained weight. His designer clothes were wrinkled and stained, and the arrogant swagger was completely gone, replaced by a nervous, twitchy energy. He walked over to us, forcing a fake, wide smile. "Hey, look at this. The Morrison boys. Back together again. Julian, man, the site looks incredible. You've really done well for yourself." I stared at him coldly, crossing my arms over my chest. "What do you want, Carter?" The fake smile faltered. "Come on, Jules. We're brothers. Look, things have been really rough out west. The market is dead. I heard you guys are expanding rapidly. I figured, with my extensive executive experience running the old company, I could step into a senior project management role here. Help you handle the heavy lifting. A solid salary, maybe a company truck, and we can really take this place to the moon." It was breathtaking. the absolute, unmitigated delusion of the man. He had destroyed our family, stolen our parents' future, and he was standing here demanding a senior promotion and a truck. Before I could even open my mouth to completely destroy him, Robert stepped forward. My father placed his massive frame squarely between me and Carter. He looked at his former golden boy with a mixture of profound disgust and deep, sorrowful regret. "You don't talk to the CEO of this company that way," Robert barked, his voice echoing across the concrete foundation. "You have no executive experience. You are a thief, a liar, and a coward. You destroyed my life's work, and you almost put your mother and me on the street." Julian built this empire with his own bare hands and his brilliant mind. Carter stepped back, looking genuinely shocked, as if a dog he had beaten his whole life had finally bitten back. "Dad, Don't call me Dad," Robert interrupted brutally. "If you want a job at Pinnacle, you go to the back trailer, you fill out an application for a general labor position, and you pray to God that Julian is merciful enough to let you pick up trash on his site for minimum wage. Otherwise, get off this property before I have security throw you out." Carter stood there for a long, agonizing moment, his face flushing dark red with deep, undeniable shame. He looked at me, hoping for a sliver of brotherly weakness. He found absolutely none. Without another word, he turned around, got back into his rusty car, and drove away. I haven't seen or heard from him since. That was 3 years ago. Today, Pinnacle Construction Solutions isn't just a successful company. We are an institution. As I sit here in my office, looking out the massive glass windows at the city skyline, I am reviewing the final, approved blueprints for our biggest project yet. A brand new, state-of-the-art $15 million pediatric hospital wing. It's the kind of complex, high-stakes job that requires absolute perfection, flawless logistics, and visionary leadership. The exact kind of job my father always dreamed of, but could never reach. The dynamic of my family has completely, fundamentally changed. We have Sunday dinners at my house now. The conversation doesn't revolve around my father's old war stories or Carter's imaginary potential. My parents ask me about my business strategies, my insights into the commercial real estate market, and my plans for national expansion. It's a strange feeling, being the highly successful, universally respected son after spending the first 30 years of my life being treated like a massive disappointment. But I have learned to accept it. The funniest, most ironic part of my new life is when Robert introduces me to his old friends and aging business associates. He puts a heavy, proud hand on my shoulder, looks them dead in the eye and says, "This is my son Julian. He's the only one in the family who truly understands what it takes to build an empire." They nod, looking at me with deep respect, completely unaware of the brutal, agonizing war it took to earn that simple introduction. I used to spend countless, sleepless nights wondering what it meant to be a real man. I thought it was about how loud you could yell, how much weight you could carry, or how naturally people gravitated toward your charisma. But tearing down my father's toxic legacy and building my own from the absolute bottom taught me the truth. Being a real man has absolutely nothing to do with dirt or volume. It's about accountability. It's about having the quiet, unbreakable courage to look at a broken, unfair system, even if it's your own family, and refusing to accept it. It's about the relentless, grinding dedication to doing the job right when nobody is watching. And sometimes, it's about having the sheer, undeniable grit to burn the old, rotten world to the ground, just so you can finally prove you were the architect all along. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It wasn't an easy journey to recount, but laying it all out like this reminds me of how far I've actually come. I hope this resonated with you in some way. Whether you're dealing with toxic family dynamics, feeling completely undervalued at your job, or just struggling to find the courage to step out of someone else's shadow, remember that you have the power to rewrite the blueprint of your own life. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, where you had to walk away from everything you knew to finally prove your actual worth? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. And before you go, if you made it all the way to the very end of this video, I have a special request. Drop a W in the comments below. That W stands for winner. It's our secret code for the 1% Club, the incredibly small, dedicated group of amazing people who have the attention span and the heart to listen to a story from start to finish. It lets me know who the real ones are in this community. Thank you again for your time. Please hit that like button if you enjoyed the story, and make sure to follow the channel so we can take this journey together in the next video. Stay strong, build your own legacy, and I'll see you in the next one.